Okay, tell me when. Good morning. Thank you for joining me again. I'm always sorry when I miss Tuesday, as I did last week. We tried to fill it in by posting one of the programs I did before, but I don't like that. I really like to engage you on a weekly basis. And maybe I will have to change the time because sometimes Tuesday mornings can be pretty hectic. And there are demands from Parliament, and there are demands involving meetings that you cannot avoid, and so on, because it's the beginning of a day. So I may have to change the time. But I want to thank you very much and welcome you in joining me this morning. Today I want to raise some matters that I think it is important for you to appreciate and understand. And it's really, these matters are really based on my reading in one of the newspapers of some of the statements made by the Prime Minister at their particular convention in which they launched their local government candidates. Okay? So I want to deal with some of the issues he raises because I think that misinformation has become a kind of accepted currency in the society and is not good for us. You cannot build a democracy based on misinformation. You cannot build a society that is knowledgeable based on misinformation. And you cannot make decisions that are reasonable and effective if they are not based on facts, on information, and on data. Okay? So the Prime Minister, for instance, said, as is quoted here in the Guardian on page A7, the Prime Minister said, the recession is receding, growth is returning, the worst is almost over, our best days are ahead of us, hard times are temporary, but we're moving in the right direction. A new society is being built on a sustainable prosperity for all. I want to say that the facts and the numbers and the reality of our lives do not support this assertion by the Prime Minister of our country. And I think that the Prime Minister could do better than to assert such things in the face of what the facts are to a population, because a Prime Minister has a responsibility to level with the population and let them know what the truth is. The recession is receding. That is not true. We had a decline in 2016 of minus 6.7%. That is recorded in the review of the economy for the year that records the numbers for 2016. We had a decline of minus 2.3% in 2017. That is recorded in the review of the economy, which covers the numbers for 2017. We had a decline of minus 0.2%. And that is included in the review of the economy, which was laid together with the documents for the budget 2019 this year in the Parliament with the numbers for 2018. So the economy is not receding at all, and that is part of a narrative that the government has been putting out for the last 2 years. Remember, the Finance Minister, Colm Imbert, indicated that the economy was turning around. And I challenged him immediately. I told him it was not turning around. And I went on television, and a former Minister of Finance, Karen Teixeira, came on the program with me and was quite outlandish and indicated, yes, it was turning around and so on, asserting without the numbers and spewing all kinds of rhetoric about what was happening in the economy. But when the challenge came from other quarters, including economists in the country, he changed turnaround to turn the corner. And you would remember that he had a battle with the IMF over their numbers, which were revised downwards. And he tried to persuade the World Bank to change their numbers to make it a little higher than they were. And these were numbers having to do with 2018. And at that time, I indicated to the entire country that there was no growth and no turnaround. What we had was a temporary growth in the production of natural gas, which came from Juniper, Truck, Angeline, etc., which had been made possible by decisions made between 2011 and 14 by the People's Partnership Government under Mrs. Kamala Pisasa. And what I said as well is that that had increased the revenue intake for the government, and that put us in a slightly better position, so that there was an increase in the production of gas and there was an increase in the revenue flowing to the country and the Minister of Finance, but there was no growth anywhere else, and the numbers became clear. All the central bank numbers, there was also a battle in the parliament in which I used the numbers from the central bank, which were the latest numbers of the time. And the Minister of Finance insisted that he was using the right numbers, which came from the review of the economy, which was 1 year earlier. And he was denying the fact that the more relevant and up-to-date information provided by the central bank was not in fact true, and that we should rely on the review of the economy. So this narrative about the recession receding is not true at all. And more than that, the Minister of Finance has indicated and projected that for 2019, we are going to have a growth of about 1.7%. That is unlikely. He had also projected a growth of 1.9% for 2018, and we saw what the reality was, which is -0. Figures were wrong, and his figures for 2019 are also wrong, and I will tell you why. First of all, the production of oil is low, and it is not going up anytime soon. Secondly, the decisions that have been made on the price of the upstream gas, based on the visit of the Prime Minister with principals in Houston and so on about 2 years ago, have created problems in the natural gas industry that have to do with the downstreamers that are going to affect the growth prospects in that particular area. Thirdly, we had the problem with Atlantic LNG Train 1, where the gas that we were expecting turned out not to be there. And we had the problem, the blip with BP, for instance, and they have now basically they have pulled out all of their drills, and they are now trying to reconfigure the situation and try and figure out what went wrong and how they might be much more accurate in terms of predictions for natural gas in the country. There's going to be no Venezuelan natural gas over the next year, and the fuels that were supplied by Petrotrin, by Heritage importing fuels from abroad, until such time as the refinery can be reconfigured, restarted, and come into production to provide fuels, so that we cannot expect any growth from Petrotrin until that happens. And we're going to have foreign exchange depletion for the fuels that we need in relation to heritage. And there is no growth that is evident based on the numbers that were available up to the time of the budget, and those included very recent reports from the central bank, the review of the economy. We had a natural gas report by Fit Solutions, etc. And we are not going to meet the targets that are expected for revenue by this budget, because first of all, the price of gas has been set for too high, $3 for MMBTU, per MMBTU, and more than that, you have a situation in which the natural gas is not likely to get above much further above the figure that it now is, which is short of the figure anticipated and mentioned by the Minister of Finance. So the economy is still in recession. In fact, the way it is going, we are going to end up in a 5-year recession by the end of 2020. So I want to say the statement by the Prime Minister that the recession is receding is absolutely and totally false. And secondly, that the recession is not receding, the recession continues, and it will continue most likely until the end of 2020, which is one of the reasons we make the case for a change of government in Trinidad and Tobago. The second thing related to that is that growth is returning. That is not happening because the recession is continuing. There is no growth outside of the natural gas sector. There is no growth in oil. There's growth in natural gas. There is no growth in manufacturing, in services, in tourism, in the financial sector to make a decisive difference in the growth of the country. In fact, what you have is growth in the natural gas sector and contraction in the entire rest of the economy. That is why businesses are closing. That is why they have trouble with the banks. That's why people are losing their homes because they cannot pay their mortgages. People are losing their jobs. You know that for a fact. Businesses are under pressure. The price of foreign exchange in the black market is approximating $9 now, which is higher than the $8 where it was about 6 months ago. So we have foreign exchange is scarce, and I mean all of these things make it impossible for the economy to grow, because even the manufacturers need foreign exchange in order to get their inputs into manufacturing, and we are not seeing any export growth in the economy. We know the ease of doing business has fallen and is very bad, and today it is difficult to get a passport within 5 weeks in this country. Can you imagine something like that? Not to mention every other thing that has to do with the ease of business, doing business, which has fallen. I dealt with that in the budget when the Minister of Trade spoke, and I responded to her. The Prime Minister said the worst is almost over. So the second thing I want to say is that the recession is receding is wrong. It is not true. We will continue with a recession until 2020. That growth is returning, that is not true. There is no growth to be discerned anywhere in the economy except for natural gas, and that growth will not be as high as they proclaim. And the worst is almost over. That is not true. Everybody in this country who has lost a job knows that that is not true, because the labor participation rate is 58%. just over 58%, under 59. And the reason that is so is that not only are people losing their jobs, not only that people cannot find jobs when they look for it, but some people are so frustrated that they have stopped looking for jobs in the marketplace, okay? So that the worst is almost over is not true. It is going to get worse. If you have no growth, if the recession continues, if the job losses continue, if the businesses are under pressure, if the foreign exchange crunch is worse, I mean, what do you expect? How are you going to say that the worst is almost over? I do agree with the Prime Minister that our best days are ahead of us and that hard times are temporary. Okay? Because we've got to get over this recession and we've got to return the country to growth and we've got to create jobs. That is the entire thrust of the United National Congress, and that is the entire thrust of the leader, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, to put the country to work again and to get the economy to recover, to get back to growth, and then to move to prosperity. Because you've got to do that before you can see the prosperity engine really making a difference in the country. And the truth is that the Prime Minister is wrong when he says that the country is moving in the right direction. It is because of all of these things that we know that the country is moving in the wrong direction. We are headed to the edge of a precipice. The economic situation is extremely bad. We cannot see light at the end of the tunnel. The financial situation is extremely bad. Reduction of import cover, the lack of export growth, and our continuing high import costs. So that is a real problem for the balance of trade and the balance of payments. And he says a new society is being built on a sustainable prosperity for all. I mean, that defies the reality. It challenges the imagination. For the Prime Minister to say something like that is terribly wrong. Okay? It is not true. It is not just not true. The country is not on a sustainable path. For us to be on a sustainable path, secondly, it has to grow. Thirdly, there has to be increased economic participation in the job market. Okay? And for it to be sustainable alone, you have to have that economic growth felt by individuals in the society in terms of jobs and income. It must be felt by families in terms of food on the table and their ability to cope both materially and psychologically. And for that to happen, we've got to be custodians of the environment, managing the environment in such a way that we can prepare the country for many succeeding generations, so that you don't live just for today, you build for tomorrow. None of that is going on in Trinidad and Tobago, and it is absolutely wrong and unfair for the Prime Minister to make such a claim. So there is no new society that the Prime Minister is building. What has happened with the Prime Minister is that he has caused terrible division within his own party. That is why Louis Leasing is fighting the Port of Spain Corporation against the PNM, for instance. And the UNC, of course, have their candidates there as well for the Port of Spain Corporation, and we hope to be able to make a dent in that corporation. But you have a very, very divided party. You have a very, very alienated supporting cast in terms of PNM members. And the entire country is alienated from the governing and government process. And it is not true at all that they are building a new society, because a new society would be based on inclusion. And basically, this society that they are building here is based on exclusion, because there is a growing gap between the haves and the have-nots in Trinidad and Tobago society. And most people have a situation in which they basically have an attitude that the government has, which is that is you to catch. You know, people are under real pressure. Okay? And the Prime Minister says we are doing it right and getting it done. We have the potential for greatness, but to realize it, we must change now. What are they doing right? You name me one thing in Trinidad and Tobago that they are doing right. What are they getting done? I cannot believe that they chose that as a theme for their election campaign for local government, because that is the one thing that the PNM doesn't want to call attention to, which is performance. Their performance has been abysmal. Everybody is feeling the non-performance in the country, in the life that they live. They've dropped in the quality of life, and the suffering that they are seeing, not only in their own homes, but in their neighborhoods and in their communities. Okay? I agree with the Prime Minister that we have the potential for greatness. And he says to realize it, we must change now. And I agree with him, we must change the government. We must begin to do that by winning these local government elections. And I want to say that it is important for people to come out in local government to begin the process of the removal of the Rowley government from office, or else this country is not going to have a chance in the future. The recession is going to continue, and we may well have deeper crises if this government were to continue and be given a chance for another 5 years. And you have an opportunity to make change, because I do agree with the Prime Minister that the potential for greatness of this country is immense, and I think that we can be a great country. But first we have to unite it. Secondly, we have to have a plan, which we in the UNC have. The UNC also stands for unity. Thirdly, we've got to be committed to job creation, recovery, growth, and taking the country on the road to prosperity. That is the strategy of the UNC, and we have an economic plan to do that. And more than that, it is important to appreciate that you need a change in direction in economic planning, in economic strategy, in economic development, in terms of interventions of an economic nature in the society to make a difference going forward in Trinidad and Tobago. And if we unite the country and we have a plan and we can create an inclusive society, we will bring the prosperity, we will begin to realize the potential of the country, and we will address the issue of the growing gap between rich and poor in Trinidad and Tobago. I just want to deal with 2 or 3 more things that the Prime Minister said. The consequences, he said the consequence of not selecting the best government for a society, for the society, have far-reaching, long-lasting consequences. The generations in TT of all races, classes, colors, creeds don't have the luxury of that apathy. It's the generations coming up which will be robbed if we don't make the difficult decisions today. He said, adding, there is no place in the new society for belief that one's voice didn't matter or one couldn't succeed. These are the right words, but they are being issued by the wrong person, and therefore they have no credibility given the reality of Trinidad and Tobago. Who does Dr. Rowley listen to in this country? How many people does he buff? If we go back from 2015 to now to figure out all the people he buff in the society who have a different point of view, whether it's the big oil companies, whether it's the business community, whether it is ordinary people, whether it's the public servants, whether it is academics at the university. And he has a whole chorus of people behind him who does the same. The worst offender in that regard is in fact Colm Imbert, who cusses everybody who disagrees with him, and he lies all the time. All right? And I mean, they do not listen. They do not pay attention to what people are thinking and feeling. And it is important to address those issues. So, I agree with the Prime Minister on some of these things, but he's the wrong person to say it. It has no credibility. And we really need to make a change in the country to make the potential of Trinidad and Tobago possible. And I want to close on something that he again says here. Rowley, and I'm quoting from the newspaper, Rowley said facts and figures will show that Trinidad and Tobago isn't a failed state. He said TT is a proud little nation striving manfully in a hostile world. But incidentally, the irony of this unkind failed label is coming from those elites who suck the most from what little we have whilst underperforming in their social contribution. So he is saying that Trinidad and Tobago is not a failed state. And secondly, he is blaming the business community for sucking the country dry because they live off the government and they do not contribute to the social welfare of the society, which is an unfair criticism of the private sector. Because if you did not have the private sector operating in this country, you would not have jobs, you would not have opportunity, you would not have any measure of growth or sustainability in the society. And would the business community decide in the morning that they were going to pack it up because there was no future in Trinidad and Tobago, this country would immediately collapse into incoherence and a warlike atmosphere in which the civility of the society would deteriorate, and we would find ourselves under conditions of civil war in this country. So I think Dr. Rowley has been absolutely atrocious to attack the business community needlessly in this way. And if they raise the issue of Trinidad and Tobago becoming a failing state, I agree with Dr. Rowley, it's not a failed state yet, but if this country continues in the hands of the Rowley government with the policies that they are now pursuing for another 5 years, we are going to end up being a failed state. Because I want to tell you what our situation is. Our debt in this country, according to the central bank, the latest figures provided by them, is $102 billion. Okay? Our indebtedness beyond that is another $60 billion. Those are debts that are not directly under the jurisdiction and control and liability of the government, but they are indebtedness to the state anyway. That is nearly the equivalent of our GDP in Trinidad and Tobago. So our indebtedness is equal to our GDP. Think about that for a minute and think of the significance of that. Our foreign exchange has fallen from $11.5 billion to just over $7 billion now. By 2020, it's going to be about $5 billion at the rate that we are going. That is going to be about 4 or 5 months of import cover. As a free foreign exchange, if you go, you get a $200 or something. You have a problem, for instance, all the businesses have a problem. So that is an issue. That is something that is not being managed in the country. I told you about the imports and exports. Our exports are not growing, or imports remain at a significantly high number. Our import of food in this country is nearly $5 billion in the country. So we have a real problem. Our national security situation, notwithstanding the intervention of the Commissioner of Police and his assertiveness and his difference in approach, the murder rate continues to be high. Security is a serious issue in this country. People coming out of the tertiary system cannot get jobs. They are choosing migration as an option after all of their frustration. People coming out of the high school situation, if they do not pass their courses and go on to tertiary education, have a real problem. They cannot be absorbed in the legitimate economy, and many of them are attracted or lured into crime. So our youth population is not seeing a future, whether they are high school age or whether they are university graduates. So we have a serious problem. And we may not be a failed state, but we are a state headed for failure. That is the situation. And the private sector is in real trouble in this country because the government controls everything. I mean, Tobago is a good example. The House of Assembly controls everything in Tobago. All the jobs are controlled by the House of Assembly. It is a total state monopoly. You can't have any entrepreneurship in Tobago at all. It is a state-dependent place in which every citizen is dependent on the House of Assembly. In Trinidad and Tobago, you have the same situation. The state has nearly 70 enterprises under its control. It needs to open up the space for the private sector so that growth can take place, confidence can return. Okay, and the whole policy of the government is absolutely wrong. In a time when the income of the country is low and the production capability of the country is low in both oil and gas, and the price of oil and gas is low, in that kind of situation, you've got to open up the country to the private sector. You can't hold on to these losing state enterprises. I mean, you've got to find a way of bringing the private sector into opportunity. You've got to open the door to entrepreneurship. You've got to open the door for small and medium businesses to grow. Amsa Makal is a family business. Look how big they got. Massey was a company owned by Neil and Massey. Look how big they got, a family business. Associated Brands, the Lockjack family, that started as a small business. Bermuda's, small business, family business. SM Jalil, Solo Enterprises, the Charles family. Okay, so you've got to recognize the importance of entrepreneurship, investment, confidence, and the need of small businesses to grow. And if you don't understand that, and the fact that if the state hogs up everything, the private sector will have no space, then there's a problem. And we are entering into we are going into a new century, which we entered about 20 years ago, 19 years ago. You know? So, this is the world of artificial intelligence, fourth industrial revolution, Internet of Things. All of these things, we are not going anywhere. Our ease of business is the worst ever. You can't get anything done in this country. We are heading for state failure. We may not be a failed state yet, but we are headed there, and it's not the private sector to blame. It is the government and the government policies and the government holding on to everything and basically locking down everything and the authoritarian control of the government. So I want to stop at this point. Everything that Dr. Rowley said on Sunday is misguided and wrong and meant to mislead. There is absolutely no truth to it. And I am going to make this presentation that I'm making here available on Facebook so that anybody who wants to see it can see it after I answer your questions. Because if they want to take on some of the issues and tell me that I'm wrong, let them do so. Because the facts are there, the numbers are there, and the lies of the government are there. All right? And we have to dispute their lies because they cannot paint a reality that is not real and contrary to the day-to-day and living experience of the people of this country, and hope to basically alter perception, all right, by their lies and their misinformation. And I think this is very irresponsible of the Prime Minister to do this. It is not true. None of the documentation will indicate that this is true. So I stop at this point. I hope you have appreciated what I have said. I'm sorry I'm a little passionate this morning because I cannot believe Dr. Rowley did what he did in that way, trying to mesmerize the population and mislead the population in this way. What I've told you is the absolute truth. You can go to the documents to find it, and more than that, you can ask me questions and I'd be happy to answer them as long as I can. Thank you very much for listening to me today.
So good morning, Dr. Tewarie, and good morning to our listeners and viewers via Facebook and the radio station. This morning we have a few questions here that are being asked by some people via Facebook. So in light of continuing recession until the end of 2020 as you projected, how do you suggest the issues of poverty will be dealt with in that people become more self-sufficient? Should the UNC assume the reins of government in 2020?
Okay, people are poor because they have no income. Okay? And if they have no income, then they have no cash. And if they have no cash, then it's very difficult for them to put food on the table or to be able to look after themselves and a family. Okay? So we've got to address the issue of poverty. There are about 300,000 people. Open the door. There are about 300,000 people in the country who are considered poor. When you say that number, it sounds very high. But those 300,000 people, the 1.4 million people in our country live in 450,000 households, okay? And there are about 600 communities, sub-communities that make up the Trinidad and Tobago. So when you take the 300,000 people and you divide them into households, there are about 4 people in a household, you find that basically you are talking about 75,000 poor households. And when you take them and you spread them over 600 communities, let us say that there are about 100 communities of those 600 communities that have little or no poverty. If you take 75,000 households and you divide them into 500 communities, you are talking about what? 75,000, and you're dividing it into 500 communities. 75 divided by 5 is 15. So you are talking about what? Approximately 150 or so, 1,500 in some cases in a community. So you see, if you take a different approach to poverty, you can solve the problem of poverty household by household, and you can solve the problem of poverty community by community. There is a difference between urban poverty and rural poverty. Rural poverty tends to be spread out, urban poverty tends to be clustered. And then there is semi-urban poverty, which is a mix of the two. So if you take this kind of approach, it is possible through an intervention of the state together with people in the communities of substance, and that could include Rotary clubs, they could include Lions Club, they could include professionals who live in some of those communities, they could include the banks, it could include private sector. If you take an approach that addresses community by community, household by household, what people need, education for the kids, skills for the graduates from the high school system who do not want to go on to tertiary education, or tertiary support, not only in academics but technical, vocational. We can create industries for single mothers to allow them to stay at home and produce. United Colors of Bennington, for instance, has a system in which women make clothes in their homes, make different things in their homes, and they pass with a van, they pick it up on a certain day of the week, they take it to the warehouse, they package it, they organize it, and they brand it, of course, check for quality, and they can do it. We can do things like that. And if there are older people who are males in the family, we can reskill those things. So through a combination of targeting households, targeting the individuals and the individual needs in households, targeting communities, and there are 600 of them in the country, bringing together public and private sector, and addressing the issue of generating income in a household and income per person in order to create an inclusive participatory society, we can solve the problem of poverty for the 300,000 or so poor people in this country who live in Trinidad and Tobago. That would be my approach. And the UNC has a plan and they have a solution.
Dr. Tewarie, another question that we have this morning is, what direction should Trinidad and Tobago's economy turn in order to escape the state of recession?
Well, we've got to first of all make a decision that, given the challenge that the state now faces for income and revenue, all right, we've got to find and therefore money to spend on projects. We've got to make a decision to open up the economy to investment, to private sector intervention, and to entrepreneurial energy, and to move the society outward from dependency on the oil and natural gas in the country. It doesn't mean we will not do it. We will continue to do that, but you need to move from that. First of all, because the whole world is moving away from fossil fuels to a greener economy, and we need to do it. And secondly, we need to build a new economy while we continue to build on the private sector which exists, that is the manufacturing, services, etc., so that we not only diversify, but we transform, we export. We need to build an export economy. We move up the value chain. We bring in technology, and that might mean attracting some new technology companies to come here and set up shop. And we are in a good position to do that because we produce about 5,000 graduates in the tertiary system every year. So we have large numbers of people who need jobs. Right now there are about 6, maybe 8 with the new graduation, 1,000 people who are looking for jobs in the country, who have university degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, etc. So that is a labor pool that is bright and energetic and that can learn fast, that any technology-driven country, a company, would be willing to come to Trinidad and Tobago for. So we need to do some of those things in order to transform the economy from fossil fuel dependent in an age in which the environment, climate change, and so on are important, and in which everything is technology driven and everything is based on ICT systems. We need to transform the economy in that way in order to get it to explode under conditions of prosperity and job creation.
Dr. Tewarie, what are some of the main particular areas we as a country should focus on developing so that we position ourselves amongst other developed countries and at a higher level on the competitive index?
Okay, well, we have a strong manufacturing sector. We need to make the manufacturing sector more export oriented. And one of the things, for instance, the UNC would do is to basically eliminate taxes for new exports that any manufacturing industry is able to achieve. So if you export more, you pay less taxes. All right, and we will do that in order to end that. We'll also do that for the services industry so that they can export more, because they will bring in foreign exchange. And the foreign exchange right now and the diversification and the exports are more important than the taxes that you would get from it. So that is one thing. The second thing is tourism. We've got to have a serious tourism thrust in the country. And that is what Shadaramas was about. That is what our attempts with Tobago was about. That is what the focusing on the sustainable assets of Trinidad and Tobago and culture and entertainment is about. And we've got to increase the tourism trust and the tourism spend, because what that can do is bring in foreign exchange as well. You've got to link agriculture to that process, to the tourism process. You've got to link agriculture to the school feeding program so that you get more production. All right? And you've got to address the situation in which the cost of production makes less costly food that is nutritious available for people than the high cost of imported food. And you've got to make it unattractive for people to import large amounts of food by substituting the production that we can create here in Trinidad and Tobago, and that can feed into agro-processing and more exports. But we've got to take the country up the value chain. We've got to introduce the technology into manufacturing. We've got to make services much more, what can I say, internet-based, and we need to drive those export-oriented services industries of that kind. We've got to create a society based on the Internet of Things so that we make the country more competitive. We've got to focus on things, as I said before, companies that are high-tech, that are export-driven, that look to our labor pool, educated labor pool as an asset which we can offer so that they would invest here. And basically our entire economy needs to be export oriented. And we've got to strengthen and give a break to family and small and medium enterprises, because they can get big. And what that means is that we've got to also orient those small, medium and family businesses towards exports as well. So while they might be importing and distributing in Trinidad and Tobago, many of them, we've got to get them into export-oriented industries, and we can facilitate that process. And finally, we've got to get the state out of more and more state enterprises so that we can reduce our subvention to the state sector into the process of ownership in Trinidad and Tobago. And finally, for the workers, we've got to bring workers into employee share ownership so that they have more than their wages as income. We've got to increase the land ownership and home ownership of people so that more people who are working can enter into the middle class. And we've got to create the opportunities for the middle class to get into entrepreneurship, for the new students out of the tertiary system to get into entrepreneurship, so that we can create more businesses and create a society of innovation that can.
Do you think the advent of integrating Venezuelans into our country marks the start of a cultural shift in paradigm? And how will the UNC government treat with the Venezuelans who are here, granted that they only have one registered year in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, our approach to this is that we will treat in a humane way and in a reasonable way, in a compassionate way, and in an inclusive way with all people who are resident in Trinidad and Tobago. All right? This is different from people who are criminal elements, who are involved in criminal activity, and who are involved in any kind of crime or dysfunctional, decent citizens and they want to make a living, we would treat with them and give them every opportunity to integrate into society. And yes, all of this is going to transform the sociology of the country. It's going to help to transform as well and affect the cultural makeup of the country. And it can also be valuable because I am sure that among them there are skills and so on that we need. I think that we made a mistake, for instance, by not taking the bailout, for instance, in the strategy based on the Spanish-speaking countries of Latin America for Trinidad and Tobago. But we can still do that with some of them here. And now it is important to have accurate figures of the population and to understand what people's assets are for a small country like Trinidad and Tobago, and to leverage those assets for very important purposes. One, to strengthen the diversity, to strengthen the unity, to create a society that is inclusive, and to give people opportunity to grow and to develop and do business, and also to give them the opportunity as well to leverage their own assets to make a contribution to the development of Trinidad and Tobago. So for instance, if we were serious about the things that we were doing and we were diversifying tourism and taking that seriously, diversifying agriculture, doing that seriously, exporting from the manufacturing sector and doing that seriously, and going into new technologies that make a difference to the development trajectory of Trinidad and Tobago, they could all be included in that. But that means also that we have to train and develop our people so that they too, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, can be fully absorbed.
Dr. Tewarie, one other question that we have is, the public sector has long been recognized as highly inefficient in our nation. What procedures or correctional policies can be implemented to create cohesion among state members and members of the public sector to increase and sustain efficiency and productivity in our nation?
Well, productivity is a big issue in Trinidad and Tobago. But I think one of the things that could help is employee share ownership. If employees own shares in a company, they are more likely to be productive and loyal because their dividends from the shares will increase on the basis of exports, on the basis of higher levels of, and if they own shares in the company, they're more likely to show loyalty to that company, whether it is state-owned or private sector oriented. So I think that would be an important step for us. In terms of the public service itself, the public service has to be results oriented. Part of the problem with these ministries is that they push people, there is no serious leadership, and they don't know what their goals are by the end of the year. These are the 5 things that we have to achieve, all right, to justify our existence. These are the 6 things that we need to achieve to justify our existence, and that should be related to budgetary, to institutional reform. It should be related to higher levels of productivity. It should be related to contribution to the development process, etc. So there needs to be a rethinking and a reorientation of all of these things.
Dr. Tewarie, how does the UNC intend to progress Trinidad and Tobago through the existing issues as a developing nation into a developed state?
The same question is coming up over and over again, and I don't want to keep repeating myself. We have to transform the economy. We have to increase productivity. We have to be much more export-oriented. We have to have stronger foreign policy that aligns our economic policy to the foreign policy partners with which we are engaged. You understand? We have to locate ourselves not only in the Caribbean, but in Latin America. All right? We've got to, now that you have the Brexit situation, we've got to strengthen our opportunities as a Commonwealth country with the UK. And we've also got to strengthen our relation and in terms of investment from the United States, which is the biggest country in our hemisphere, also Canada, as we do this also with Latin America for the diversification of both investment and exports. Okay, so all of these things we need to do. But the questions really point to me the fact that people are concerned about the fact that the economy is going nowhere. The government has not an idea as to what to do or how to do it. And therefore they are very worried about the country, and they want to see that we have a way of taking the country forward. And we do have a plan, and we do have ideas, and we know how to get this country to develop status.
Dr. Tewarie, what do you think can be done to protect citizens against police brutality, rogue police officers, and those who take civil complaints for...
There are two things here. The country, let's face it, is pretty lawless. All right? And you have a situation in which this lawlessness is out in the society, but the lawlessness is also inside the institutions. So that you have a bunch of police in the society who are pretty lawless too. Now, this is not the majority, they are the minority. But if you have lawless police officers, you have a problem. Because what they will do on their position against the population. But you also have a population that is pretty lawless. People want to do whatever they want. They want to break the law with impunity. They don't want to listen to nobody, and so on. And part of that, and they would not let me speak in Parliament about this, but we just had a bill in Parliament which increased the powers and the protection of the police, the prison officers, immigration officers, the customs officers, and the fire officers, and increase the responsibility and therefore the ability to deal with the population through the law, all right, and protect the police service. And because they wouldn't let me talk about these things in Parliament, I was really trying to use the situation to show that the bill was really transforming the power structure between the authorities of the state and the population at large. And it was taking power of assembly and rights that were human rights from the population and increasing the authority of the police. So that, for instance, if you challenge what a policeman was doing under the law, you could be faced with a new charge in that situation under the law. But they did not give me a chance to speak. They tried to curtail me every time I tried to speak in the Parliament. I mean, it is really ridiculous. The opposition, the government members get up and they object on the simplest grounds. And first of all, it takes you off course while you are speaking. Secondly, they chatter incessantly in the Parliament. And then you have a situation in which rulings generally seems to favor the government side. So you're at a kind of disadvantage in the parliamentary system. But I mean, I will continue to raise it. I do not think that a healthy society is one in which the police can abuse their authority. And we are seeing those things happening over and over again in the United States, and the unfairness about it, and the extent to which people are standing up to prevent those things from happening. At the same time, you cannot have a society in which murders are dealt with, gangs are dealt with, guns are dealt with, drugs are dealt with, and which there are complicity between the legitimate entities of a society, whether in the state or in the private sector, and the illegitimate and illegal activities of people in gangs involved in guns, etc., where there is a kind of connection between these things. If you do not have strong police force, all right, and strong laws to be able to deal with these things, okay?
Dr. Tewarie, what do you think the UNC can successfully complete their efforts for constitutional reform so to empower the citizen to reject non-performing local government representatives and parliamentary representatives before the full length of their term?
Okay, well, you know, there was a proposal for local government reform by the People's National Movement. But that has become stuck in a joint select committee. They spent 4 years, they did not do the reform. It is now before a joint select committee. It is hardly likely that those reforms will come to Parliament for debate before the elections are over, because you just have about 20 days or so now for the elections to be completed. The UNC has always been strong on local government reform. We are for decentralization. We are for devolution. Decentralization does not mean just local government. It means putting a lot of authority under local government in terms of local jurisdiction. That is true. And we started that process with the Planning and Facilitation of Development Bill, in which we gave the authority to local governments to deal with any simple development under 20 homes, or any development with less than 20 homes, etc. So we are for more decentralization, but more than that, we are for devolution of power, which is to say that the people, the local government, should be able to exercise a degree of control and authority that would allow them to look after their burgesses and their citizens properly. And those would be the main things, and the devolution would be for power to the local government with accountability, and the decentralization would make it possible for economic, sub-economic strategies, sub-regional economic strategies to dovetail with local government and national strategies by the central government to bring people more into the economic benefits of a society. All right, so we are seriously for local government reform, and if we were in government again, we would reform the local government. The other thing which the political leader, Mrs. Kamla Prasad-Bissessar, has raised over and over again is the unequal size of local governments and the unequal allocations for local government given the ratio of local governments to population. And that would be something we would also want to look at. We would want to look at both the question of evening up the size, evening up the number of people under the jurisdiction of a local government, which might mean more local governments. And you would also want to look at the allocation question in relation to number of people to be solved, to be served, sorry. Okay. I want to thank you very much for listening to me today. I hope what I've said has been meaningful to you. I hope you will reflect on some of it. And I want to thank you for your many questions, which I found very, very good today. And I tried my best to answer some of those questions. Thank you very much for listening to me on 97.5 radio. And I want to thank the radio station for covering this live. And thank you very much for joining me here on Facebook Live and for making this program. I will alert you to the next time I'm going to be on. I'm going to try to come on again next week.